Good morning, Professor Hess.
Good.
Well, I'll try to call you Ed, as you asked me many times.
Thank you.
So nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor, such a pleasure to meet you. And on behalf of this group, we feel very grateful and privileged for your time. So please feel very welcomed here.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for inviting me. And I like seeing smiling faces.
Yes, in spite of this kind of difficult moment for all of us around the world, and particularly here in Brazil with this COVID-19, but we are doing our best here to have a very positive agenda here for us, right? Ed, as I mentioned in our emails, this is a group that is comprised by senior managers, by board members, and by thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies. And we are under this leadership program in which we are debating critical issues every month based on a book that is selected to serve as a framework for the discussions. And today we are talking about your wonderful book, Humility is the New Smart, in order to respond this broader question, which is what can we do to remain relevant in the era of artificial intelligence. And just for you to know, Ed, we have started about 1 hour and a half ago, so 6:30 EST. So we are well warmed up here, okay, to talk to you. And in order to hear you as much as we can, I'm going to kick off this conversation with an initial question. And then I'm going to open the space for other questions from members of our group, okay?
Very good. Very good. I love questions.
So, Ed, how your ideas have been received in the past few years by companies during your talks and workshops? So, do you believe that most of them are really changing the focus from old smart behaviors to new smart ones? So, to what extent, for example, do you see companies emphasizing and rewarding behaviors rather than just numbers? So if you could elaborate on that for us, please.
One wonderful question. It depends on the part of the world that the business is based in. It's very culturally based at this point in time. As I look back over really this journey into bringing learning in the neuroscience of learning into organizations, and it goes back over 10 years as to where my work seems to resonate the most. What's interesting is it seems to resonate the most outside the United States, because the United States has the most unique model of capitalism in the sense that survival of the fittest culture, all right? And now there are, and I'll answer where it's taking on the United States, but just as a general rule, Europe, the Nordic countries, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, etc., South America, there's a more of a community, the community environment in a country that falls over into the business environment. Now, in the United States, companies are embracing it, have reached the stage where they see the wall, so to speak. They're not going to be able to continue to grow unless they take their human component to a higher level. So they have bought into the fact that in order for me to compete in the digital age, we have to be better, faster learners, and that means we have to get in the human development business. We have to basically help our employees learn how to learn so they can be most receptive to customers. The companies that if you will, buy into this and make the commitment for change, generally speaking, are companies that are in businesses which are very consumer oriented, very people oriented, all right, where the people contact, the emotional contact with people, and that, you know, that is sort of the what brings it all together. Do one, everybody's going to need to be what I call a hyper learner, but do I need a lot of human beings to do that? And are my customers lots of human beings? All right. When you get lots of human beings, then you get, quote, the messiness of humanity. And so the companies in the United States that are buying into it aggressively and really transforming are companies whose customer base is heavily based on lots of human beings who have different needs, but and it's based on human emotions. So I hope I'm answering your question. It depends on what part of the world, and different parts of the world, the buy-in process is different because of, I'll call it cultural, but also model of capitalism. And then it depends on industry. If people are in a business that is highly dependent upon human beings, either creating the deliveries, products, services, or being on the opposite end buying, those are the companies that are most impacted by this. Does that make sense to people?
Yes. So I think we have a couple of hands raised here. I'm going to hand the words here for Angela and then to Yeda.
Good morning, Professor Hess.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's an honor to have you here. I coordinate the leadership program with Alex. And as you said, we can only achieve our full potential when and if we are defined by others. And as I work with corporate governance and diversity and intelligence and collective intelligence, we need this defiance, we need this openness to help us to overcome the bias. But I have two related questions regarding this. The first one is, in your opinion, what is the role of the gender construction on our behavior regarding the new smart characteristics, considering that men and women are socialized differently and society requires different characteristics and behaviors from us? And of course, the listening, the openness, and communal orientation for women, and more agentic approach to male. And the second one is that even if we can develop these new smart behaviors individually, considering that we are extremely vulnerable and prone to group conformity and group biases, what would be a group strategy to overcome this bias? Because when we are in a homogeneous group, such as all white and male corporate directors in a boardroom, they won't listen to minority people unless they have this 30% reach. So what would be the strategies for us not to conform with the group, because the group conformity is so strong? These are my questions.
Two very important questions, and I will separate them if it's okay. The science of collective intelligence is pretty compelling on your first question, the gender difference. And what's also fascinating is the science of collective intelligence goes back a couple of decades, and it basically was the best research comes out of MIT and Carnegie Mellon, which are two engineering and technology schools. I find that interesting, all right, that are generally male dominated. This research was done by some young women professors at MIT, and the research basically was, looking at, how does effective collaboration come about, all right, and what's the qualities that people need to bring to the table. And MIT did a couple of research studies, and what they found out was that, and the studies were designed in the following way. Teams of 5 people. Certain teams are going to be given complex problems to solve. Other teams are going to give something creative or innovative to try to create and have a conversation. It's all about collaboration. What type of conversations are we having? And the teams, since it's MIT and Carnegie Mellon, you have to give them the assumption that the design of the experiments is good. So I'm not going to go deep into that, all right? The big variable they were measuring was gender. And you probably know the research. But the research showed, all right, that the best or most high performance collaborative teams that solve either complex problems or are creative, innovative teams, that occurs when there is 5 women and no men. The research then shows the second best teams have 4 women and 1 man. And then the third best, 3 women and 2 men. All right? Carnegie Mellon.
I show these results. Usually I show these results and I said, I don't have a conflict of interest here.
Yeah. And Carnegie Mellon found out about it and said, no, this doesn't work. And Carnegie Mellon did 3 separate studies that replicated, all right? So there's basically several studies. And that is compelling evidence that men, generally speaking, there are exceptions, and there are women that are poor collaborators, okay? But we're talking about, generally speaking, men look at collaboration as a competition, as a transaction. Women look at it as a relational activity to make sure that everybody is heard, and by everybody being heard, it's a democracy. You basically come to better results, all right? This is pretty hard for senior executives that are male to swallow, all right? I can tell you, I've been down this road. But the science is the science. And when they start basically putting in place different processes for collaboration that basically are built upon building caring, trusting teams that can have making meaning conversations, all right? So caring, trusting teams, and the leader's job is to create that everybody on the team. Making meaning conversations are basically not advocacy, okay? Generally speaking, you know, us men, you know, we're competitive. We want to win. I can tell you, when I was in the business world, all right, and I was there 20 years, and, you know, how did I view collaboration? As soon as what I was advocating, somebody said yes to, my job was to end that meeting as fast as possible and get out of there, all right? In other words, I was highly competitive, all right? I wasn't obnoxious or anything. I tried to be kind, but you know, at that point in time in my life, my ego was a little bigger than it is now, all right? I wasn't as open-minded. But I can tell you that this changing the concept to otherness instead of me, it all goes back to humility. It all goes back to humility. We've got to tame and master what's going on inside of ourselves, all right? And the big thing is that basically no one is going to succeed in the digital age by themselves. You need others, and the reason you need a diverse group is that the science of learning is compelling. We basically go out in the world and see what we believe. End of story, all right? We go out in the world and see what we believe, okay? We're cognitively blind. We constantly rationalize to fit into what we already believe. And we need others who basically can see things differently than us. Lots of times that and that means different training, different backgrounds, different gender, all right, etc., different ethnicity. So I think that's the answer to the first question is it's not going to be optional. It's not going to be optional over a period of time, because success going forward in the business world is going to be the quality of an organization's ability to continuously adapt at the pace of technological change. That's dependent upon the human capability to adapt. That's heavily dependent on emotions. That's heavily dependent on teams. Caring, trusting teams are going to be basically the structural model in most organizations that are large enough that basically that we're not talking about a sole proprietorship, but you know, even in an entrepreneurial business, I mean, you get to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 employees. The same type of rules are going to apply, because basically, all right, emotional engagement with customers is so critical in the entrepreneurial business. All right, if you're just basically producing something that a machine's going to be able to produce, it's only a matter of time before you'll be doing something else. All right. So, all right, now give me your second question again. Oh, how to go into the boardrooms.
In a homogeneous group, how to overcome our bias to
to basically keep it homogeneous.
Exactly. and not to listen the minority that is there.
Yeah.
To the group conformity.
Yeah. This is going to be a unusual answer, but I'm trying to be very practical. Okay, so bear with me, and you don't have to agree with me. Okay, but just bear with me. Okay, because I'm maybe coming out of left field. Ultimately, they will change when they're scared if they don't change. Fear and ego are the two biggest inhibitors to learning. But I've learned over the last 15 years that at the senior level, boards in the senior level, the biggest motivators of change are ego and fear. I want to win, I don't want to look bad, and I'm fearful of losing. Okay? So, you know, why is a board going to be open? They need to basically confront the science. They need to be educated about the science and why that's the case. They need to be educated about the science of how they learn and the fact that they're suboptimal learners. They need to go through in their own. When I work with people at that level, I make the senior executive team go through the same processes that, quote, the people that report to them and the employees go through. All right. Now, because they start out being, they don't want to look bad in front of people, they go through it with themselves. All right. And I don't delegate that work. I put them through it, and I make sure that they confront reality. All right. Otherwise, I tell them, you know, they're wasting my time. Okay. And that also, they don't want somebody walking out on them. At least most of them don't. So people got to basically, it's the conversation is got to be science-based, but every person needs the why. Why should I change? Why should we do this? But it really comes down to why I should change what I believe. And do you want the organization to succeed? Do you want to have a good legacy? Do you want to be successful? You still want your stock options to grow? Well, here's reality. Here's reality. That's the only way that I've been able to reach people. And I know it sounds unusual for me to say that, you know, you got to have a why. And the funny thing is many times the why is not for the greater good. The why is not before it's the right thing to do. The why is because I think I need to do this, otherwise I'm going to look bad. We're going to fail. Earnings are going to go down. My stock options are going to go down. I don't know that, you know, that's just human nature with some people. Now, there are people that buy into it for their legacy. All all right? Especially if they're the founders of a company that's gone public and everything, and the founder is concerned about his or her legacy. This is legacy making. This is how you leave behind. This is how you impact society, impact people. So it depends on the story, okay? And I have, I can tell you I have lots of different meetings, lots of different band-aids on, depending on, what story works and what story doesn't work. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hand over the word to Yeda, please. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ed. I'm in the UK, so afternoon for me. Thanks a lot for coming to see us. I just want to talk about culture and behaviors and role models, because if you look at the company that the biggest company in the world and the billionaires that's just been the list of billionaires just published by Forbes, you have Bezos, number one, Elon Musk, and then you have Arnaud French, and then you have Bill Gates, and then Zuckerberg, and then Buffett. 4 of these 6 people, they work already in companies where machine and algorithm dominate. They dematerializing industries so far. And I don't know whether these people have displayed these behaviors that you talk on the book, and whether these people are realizing this. And when you go and try to hire an executive for a company, a CEO, and we are in the board of companies, and we orientate the headhunters. The first characteristics are go-getters, driven by results, assertive people, and delivering. So how do you influence, and whether these people that are on the top, that are role models, everybody wants to be a Jeff Bezos, can change to include this type of behaviors that you mentioned in your book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And Steve Jobs used to be the bane of my life, because when I got in deeply in this area, everybody said, well, look at Steve Jobs, he's not that way, and I want to be like Steve Jobs. And so now Steve has passed on, and we've got Bezos, and we got Facebook, etc., Elon, but what's interesting is if you look at the CEO of Microsoft, and you look at the growth of Microsoft since he's taken over, and it's not been that long, he's an example that basically role models 6-star on a 5-star, right, everything that I write about. Are there going to be exceptions? Yes, there's going to be exceptions. But when I look back over my career of the great companies that I've studied and worked with, Southwest Airlines, all right, is an example. Herb Kelleher was a very passionate, strong-willed person. Can do, will do, more. But he built the most successful airline in the United States based on one word: love. Quotes around love in the workplace. And same thing with the Ritz-Carlton Corporation. And so I can't dispute the fact that there are successful people who get successful because they're the primary owners of the company, doing it differently than I'm talking about. Google is I would say different than, at this point, Amazon, and different than Facebook. Google has got a lot of the cultural aspects, idea meritocracy, all right, open-mindedness, humility, otherness, the emotional part. Google is pretty well into this, as is Pixar Animated Studios. So it comes down to, do you believe the science of high human performance and the science of learning, which is overwhelmingly basically underlies everything I write, or are you going to bet the ranch that you can be Bezos or Zuckerberg? All right. that you're going to find that person. And notice both of them were entrepreneurs. All right. Both of them were entrepreneurs. None of them were CEOs of a company who then went to another company and built a company. And so when this comes up in conversations, I ask them, do they think that the result works because the entrepreneur is still in control? If you look at Apple today's culture is very, very different than it was under Jobs. All right, it's much more humanistic. If you look at the CEO, he is a very, very different person than Steve Jobs. So I don't have a easy answer for you. In my own mind, I don't know whether I say I rationalize it, but I put those into aberrations. There may be some geniuses that come along that basically are able to do it their way, and people love being part of that, and they get high performance, etc. That usually doesn't transfer to a successor. All right, it doesn't transfer to a successor. You don't have that same type of genius. There won't be another Elon Musk. All right, there's not another Steve Jobs. And so maybe it's also the timing in the organization and the board's understanding of, we have this unique human being. We're not going to have another one. What are the basics that are going to be necessary to keep this organization going? And that's the best I can do with that.
Yeah, and perhaps Ed, I think Microsoft is also a good example, because with Satya Nadella, he changed the mindset of people there from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. So I think it goes in line with your view, right?
Yeah. It was very interesting. When he first came aboard as CEO, after a couple of months, he got his leadership team together and he said, "We're going away for a week-long retreat." And they said, "We've never done that. We don't have time. We're busy." "What are we going to do on the retreat?" He says, "We're going to get to know each other." And they said, "That's not business." Aren't we going to be talking about products, strategy? No. We're going away because I have learned that none of us on the leadership team know each other. And we're going to go away and sit in the woods for a week. Okay, of course, they're not going to be in a tent. They're going to be in a nice place. Sit in the woods for a week, and we're going to stay there until we get to know each other. And he says, and the goal is compassion. Compassion. And kicking and screaming, he took his leadership team, and that was the beginning of the cultural transformation. That was the beginning. He had the courage to do it. But what's interesting is if you know anything about the CEO of Microsoft, you know his background. Okay, his background was not survival of the fittest. His background was not big ego. All right, culturally, his background was all about otherness and etc. And so he was a person of diversity. All right, that Ballmer and Bill chose, who was very different from them. And the organization needed that because both Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates were not like this CEO. I mean, I spent lots of time when they were running the company inside Microsoft, doing works in Microsoft, okay? And Microsoft, the old Microsoft looked much more like Amazon and much more, I'll leave it at Amazon because I haven't spent that much time in Facebook. More like Amazon, okay? Just boom, boom, boom. So they were wise. Two command control type people chose somebody culturally very different than them and basically backed away and said, "It is yours." And he transformed Microsoft. It's a great success story.
I'm going to hand over to Anderson, but just before that, as far as we understood, Ed, you have a hard stop at 9:45, right? So I'm going to separate a few minutes at the end for you, if possible, to share with us some of the key ideas of your latest book, right? Which is a great pick for next editions of this program, which is Hyper Learning. And it's very nice. I started reading, so how to adapt to the speed of change. So perhaps if you could later share a couple of words about it, it would be great for us. And Anderson, please.
Hi, good morning, Ed, and thanks for joining us this morning. And I'm taking the liberty to call you Ed.
Please.
That's
not a liberty, that's a request. That's a request.
Oh, great. That's great. Well, I'll ask a question which goes away from the corporate world, but I just got curious to see your view on this. I believe in the society there is a lot of people, if not the majority probably, that are happy to be consciously or even unconsciously the mechanical doers, the ones like to spend their lives pushing a button and that's going to be it. They are not really interested in being people of high order thinking or anything like that. Just like to listen your views on what would be the role of these people in this new society.
Well, if you mean by people like to push the buttons, if you mean people that like doing the same thing over and over, all right, people that like doing linear things, okay, if I do this, this happens, and I'll push this button. The ultimate answer is they're going to be automated. They're going to be automated. I mean, human beings are going to have jobs in the coming decade if they can add value that technology can't add. And that's basically three different ways. You got to think differently than the technology can think. The technology is not going to be as good as humans can be in emotionally engaging, at least for the near future. But technology is working hard to basically, create little artificial friends for your children and my grandchildren and etc. Technology is going to get emotional, and then the third area where humans will be needed to do the work is we call them in the United States trade jobs, and that's not a derogatory manner, but people that do actual going into situations and you have to analyze and diagnose what the problem is, all right, iteratively diagnose, and then you got to basically use equipment to iteratively fix, all right, and it requires manual dexterity. So machines are not going to be good at going in and basically iteratively trying to figure out what's causing, my heater not to work, or my, something in the plant not to work, or something in the spaceship not to work. And so it really comes down to human beings are going to be needed to do the things that are going to be uniquely human beings for the near future. The pace of change is such that Daniel Kahneman, who I assume all of you know who Daniel Kahneman is, a Nobel laureate and great psychologist, he came out over a year ago and made a statement that was just shocking to me that he made it, because he's not been big on technology. But he said by 2030, there'll be no human cognitive tasks that technology won't be able to do better by 2030. Now, Ray Kurzweil, who's the technology guru at Google, has said that 10 years earlier than that. So he said, 20 years ago, it would be 2030. So it's pretty clear that technology with machine learning and AI is going to continually to advance. And so what that means is the emotional part of business is going to be the place where humans are going to have to excel at, and because collaboration is emotional, highly emotional. Working with customers is highly emotional. So going back to your question, you have to basically figure out, how am I going to add value in the digital age? and in most cases, you need to basically add value differently than the technology is going to add, because the technology is going to become ubiquitous and very cheap. Okay, any entrepreneur that wants to use AI, all right, in their business is going to be able to buy it, all right, at reasonable prices, cheap prices. I mean, the technology is going to be freely available as a service in itself, all right. So that's the best answer I can give you. That we as human beings, all of us have got to continually to evolve, so we add value in ways different than the technology, because the technology is going to continue to advance and continue to expand and continue to cause shorter lifespans. United States, Fortune 500 companies, big companies usually succeeded for 100 years, 50 years, okay? The life expectancy of a new public company in the United States today is less than 14 years. Less than 14 years. And so the volatility that we're going to experience as human beings and as societies, and where the biggest thing that concerns me, much more than the ability of people like you adapting, is the ability of our governments to adapt. The ability of governments to adapt and to lead adaptation. That's where a big differentiation will ultimately also be into what parts of the world come through this in better shape than other parts of the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've answered your question. I've tried.
Absolutely, and you actually came into a conclusion that was something that I've been debating with myself about. It's how our societies can adapt our education systems to bring all this contingent of people that are not part of these discussions or this high thinking profile mentality into this new world. So there might be a contingent of useless people per se.
Yes.
And that's very serious. And that's very serious from a societal viewpoint, country viewpoint, but from a humanity viewpoint, because you can go back over 2,000 years in human history, and when you get to the point that you have a extreme divides between, and I'm not using these words in a derogatory manner, it's a quantitative manner, okay? The people, the haves and the have-nots, and that doesn't mean the have-nots there's something wrong with them. They just they've not been given the education to play in the system, okay? You basically have revolutions, and you basically have turmoil, and 2,500 years of history. And I mean, it's a big issue in the United States. I have been, for the last 2 years, spending a lot of time advocating the fact that we have to transform our public school system here, because our public school system is based on educational principles which have been outdated for decades, all right? It's all content based. Let's go to school, memorize certain content so we can take standardized tests so everybody feels good that we're a good student and we're a good teacher. Well, all of that stuff that you can memorize in a standardized test, it's going to be a human. There's no way a human being is going to know more content than a smart machine. There's no way. There's no way a human being is going to be able to basically retrieve it perfectly like a smart machine, or as quickly as a smart machine, or update their mental models as a smart machine. And so you're right. The education systems have got to basically change how they educate people, all right? At least in the United States, the model that's needed today was advocated 60 years ago by leading educational psychologists, and has been being advocated every decade for 6 decades, and we still are at a model that is basically linear and machine-like. Because the Industrial Revolution, the goal was to create human machines. Industrial Revolution was built on human machines. Well, now we're going to have machines better than humans, so humans don't need to be machines. Humans need to be humans. What makes you unique as a human? That's what we have to basically help people find their uniqueness. That's the organizations that unite the technology with human uniqueness. Many executives are shocked when I say that the fundamental differentiator in your business is going to be the quality of emotional engagement in your company. And they, some of them look at me like I landed from Mars. Okay. The quality of emotional engagement. Emotions are going to be ultimately, and there's lots of people here I see, okay, lots of people. This is going to happen in your lifetime. Almost everybody I see here, except maybe me, all right? It's going to happen in your lifetime. It probably will happen in my lifetime too. That we're going to get down to it, that ultimately what's going to make us different than the technology is emotions. How we manage them and what we do with them and how we engage other people. And learning is highly dependent on emotions, positive emotions.
Yeah, it's very nice to hear, Ed, that in the 20th century, performance was a matter of engineering that was independent of humans' emotions. And now performance is a matter of psychology in which emotions play a key role. And so I have a second question, which is one of the most interesting aspects of your book, in my opinion, is how you manage to connect these mindsets and behaviors that are needed for this human excellence with your own personal journey of transformation to become a more open, caring, and mindful, right, a human being. And frankly, it really impressed me the way you responded my first email. I share it with the group, and particularly with the lowercase Ed that you added at the end of the email. So my second question is, what came first? Did you start delving into issues such as reflective listening and mindfulness for your intellectual purposes and then decided to apply them in your personal life? Or it was the other way around, So you start the process of personal change with a focus on these practices and then decided to write a book about it?
In the hyper learning book has a website which also includes the humility book and the learn or die book. On that website there's a link, who's Ed really ? And it has 5 stories, short stories. Okay, it's not an ego trip. Okay, and it's short stories, but they are the stories of my hitting the wall, basically. All right, how did I get to where I am? And no, did I basically buy into this science? And I got to the science by hitting walls and facing major life decisions that were giving me information and having advice, information that if I didn't change my ways, okay, I would, not have as happy a life or nice a life as it was. And so, and it really, there was one week in basically over 30 years ago. Let me see how to answer your question concisely and not make this so much about me. I was very fortunate. I came from very, very humble backgrounds, and my family was an outsider in the area that we lived in the United States. I was raised in Georgia, southern town, and I was raised in a small little town in rural Georgia. So I was in a southern town, which was state, which was different, and then I was in a small town, which is even different. And my mother was from Massachusetts, so she was, quote, a Yankee. She wasn't a Southerner. My father was able to get out of Germany in the Holocaust, and so he was an immigrant. And we lived in a small town that was very, very in an era that was very different than, maybe not so different now, but was different for a while. That was very, very, diversity was not really liked. All right, so we were outsiders, very outsiders, and so that. But what changed my life was the head football coach of the little town, who I don't know how he knew me when I was getting ready to go to the 8th grade, called me up one day. He says, "You're going to start the 8th grade in a couple of months." I said, "Yes, sir." In Georgia, football coaches are more important than the governor. Football coaches are more important than the preacher or the minister. Football coaches are basically God with a little g, all right? And he says, "I'd like for you to come to my house every morning and be here at 7:30 and ride to school with me." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yes, I want you to ride to school with me. Are you willing to do that?" And so the first day I go to high school, I'm driving up, sitting shotgun to the head football coach. And all of a sudden, my life, my family's life, my little brother's life in that small southern town, all of a sudden, 180-degree change. No longer did I walk into the barbershop and the owner say, "You go sit in the back. You can't sit here. You go sit in the back. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anybody. I'll let you know when it's time for your haircut." The next time I went into the barbershop, the owner comes, stops cutting someone's hair, comes in, shakes my hand, takes a patron sitting, a man sitting, and says, "Move down from here. Move, get over here. You sit right here." Goes to the Coca-Cola machine, brings me a Coca-Cola. "Here's your Coca-Cola. I'll cut your hair next." That was the change in my life that got me started. All right. And so others helped me. And then I went on and on and on. And so I'll try to be concise. That one week in the fall of 1987, I had my 3 only big defeats at that point in time in my life. I came down to breakfast one morning, and I was in investment banking. I don't know how to say it and everything. I mean, I was very good at it. I mean, I loved it. I was full of it. My wife looked at me and she said, "We need to talk." I said, "Okay." She says, "You're not the person I married." I said, "Excuse me? What do you mean?" She says, "You're never here. You're never here emotionally for me and our daughter. You're not here. You're consumed by your work. This is not working. We have to talk." And this is public because I've written about it. So, and it's embarrassing I never can say it without being totally embarrassed. Believe it or not, I did this. I looked at her and says, "I hear you. You're right. We need to talk. But I got an important meeting I need to go to. Can we talk tonight?" And I got up and left the breakfast table and went to my meeting. I mean, it's like, but that's how far gone I was. All right. To make a long story short, I came home and there was an envelope on the table and it says, "I'm moving out for a while." And, fortunately I was in investment banking. I had, we had enough money. I mean, my wife could do whatever she wanted. And in fact, she had more of the money than I had. Didn't care about the money. And so, she moved out. And I said, "Wow, I got to get help." And so I called people, executives that I knew, and I said, "You got a coach? You got somebody?" So the same week, I had my first big financial loss. And then the same week, I was up to become CEO of a big company. And I really wanted that job. That was cool. The headhunter called me up, the recruiter called me up and says, "Let's have lunch." And man, I put the phone down. I says, "He's not taking me to lunch to tell me no. I have got the job." So I go sit down at lunch and everything in this private room, and he looks at me and he says, "You're the most qualified person for this job." I mean, it was almost like I could not help myself lifting off the chair. Okay, it's like, yes. He says, "But I'm not recommending you for the job." I says, "What?" "I'm the most qualified." He says, "You're the type of person that you always got to have a mountain to climb. You're never going to be happy. And I'm afraid after 2-3 years, you'll leave this company. And I can't do that to the company. So you're not getting the job. And by the way, here's a book I think you need to read. If you read the book, I'll take you to lunch and we'll discuss it. And, and so in 1 week, I had my wife leaves. I lose a lot of money in a business deal with my brother, and I lose that job. Well, that shows you how dense I was. All right, it took all that to basically make me get into a different. And I spent a year with my counselor coach. She was wonderful, and that started me along the journey. And what was so fascinating about that, the more I slowed down to emotionally engage with people that I was working with, the higher their performance was. Because I always learned that in order to be efficient, go right to the, come in, let's have a meeting. Here's the issue. Let's solve the problem. No chit chat. Don't have time for chit chat. Don't care about your personal life. Wish you all the best. We got a job to do. That was me. I was a machine. And I found when I basically started changing in the late 80s, so this has been going on a while, all right. So I went into the 90s, everything. The team's performances went off the chart. The more I was human with people and cared about them, the higher the performance. And then it was more joyous. And that's sort of, in a nutshell, where it sort of all came from. And so, no, I learned the hard way. And then when I brought all the science of learning into my work, but a lot of what I did in the business world was similar to what the science was saying in learning, because I was fortunate to have a very renowned cognitive psychologist who was my mentor, and has been now for over 40-something years. My mentor giving me direction into the science as to where to go. And so I was always into that. So long-winded answer. Sorry about getting so personal and all that, but it was not a pretty story. And so I learned the hard way. Does that answer your question?
Well, more than that, Ed, it's very difficult to say anything at this point. And because of the time, unfortunately, the only thing I can tell you on behalf of the group is that we would like to thank you deeply once again for your generosity, for taking your time to be with us. And it was,
and for your openness too, and to share with us your story. It's not a bad story, it's a great story, and it's not an easy path, I think, for anyone that try or want to behave differently. We have all our difficulties and our own walls to climb, right? So thank you so much, Professor Ed.
Let me interrupt. I have more time, okay, because of the time change here. If people would like to stay 15 more minutes or whatever, if there's more questions, I'm happy to stay. I don't have a hard stop. When you said the hours are different now here, so I have more time if there's more questions. You don't have to ask me questions, but I'm saying if there are more questions, I'm happy to stay longer if you have the time. It's up to you.
wow, it's such a privilege. So everybody, we have some more minutes. Raise your hands.
Yeah. I mean, we can, I had something that got basically moved from next. All right, so I have time. We can answer more questions, but it's not mandatory. If people want to drop off, that's fine too.
Yes.
Well, just to catch the story of your story, Ed, that you said, and also connecting that with the difficulties that we have to reach this leadership people that are in the boardrooms and are with this mindset of command and control, and with this machine mindset and industrial one. You said earlier that we should try to convince them by the research, by what science shows us that we know already about collective intelligence and so on. But your story shows that how we have to have a big something very big to be open to this otherness. And I think that this intellectual and these utilitarian arguments, they have limited access to people that wanted to behave and wanted to think in the way that they already think. What do you think about it?
That's a very, very, very good point. When you're what I have found when having conversations of that level, they are more likely to buy into a story because all of these people, generally speaking, they're predominantly men, and generally speaking, they've been successful. Generally speaking, they got a pretty big ego, okay? And what I have found is the human side doesn't sell to those type of people up front. What sells is the story of where technology is going, and the fact that technology is going to fundamentally change every industry, and there's going to be a fallout and a consolidation in every industry. So there won't be 15 companies in an industry have, as our, I'm talking to the board, you're not going to have 14 competitors. Maybe there's 3 of you, maybe there's only 2 of you, but technology is going to drive consolidation, all right? And who basically has the best technology the earliest, and who's able to utilize and scale the technology through their various processes. And so what I have found with those types of groups, they know enough about the technology and they know it's coming, that the fear of losing in the technology race is what raises the question, well, what do we do? All right. Well, of course, we got to basically, I have a pitch that I give them. There's 4 transformations that have to be done. There's the digital transformation, the technology, but there's the cultural transformation. There's the leadership model transformation. All right. And then there's the behavioral transformation. All right. And so that's at least what I have found. It doesn't mean that every time I make that pitch, everybody says yes, all right? But that's the only thing I have been able to, only way I have been able to reach those types of people. And once they buy into, we want to be, it's our duty. We're going to be one of the survivors. We're going to be one of the leaders. Now, how do we do it? Then, okay, then you got to be a hyper learning organization. And what does that mean? And you save all the emotional stuff for the last. Okay, so they buy into technology. You're right. We got to be highly adaptive. We got to be constantly learning at the speed of change. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we got to have these types of process. Okay, well, what makes that work? Emotions. Okay, so that by that far, I've got them 80% down the road till I hit the soft spot. And basically the last 20% of my pitch to them is the big differentiator. Soft skills are going to be the skills. So I don't even use the word emotions. Soft skills are going to be the skills that human beings are going to have to excel at. And I wrote a piece.
Like a Trojan horse.
Yeah, that's right. And okay. I wrote a piece for CEO World about soft skills. All right. And all of a sudden, soft skills, okay, I sort of get it. It's but they don't have to. It's the Trojan horse. You said it so succinctly, and so that's how I have been able, and I can, and and please don't sit back and say, that's that sounds good. It's sort of interesting that he figured out how to do that. Well, no, I figured out how to do that because I got beaten up so many times. It was an iterative process. Okay, I didn't sit back and dream up that story and go start selling it 3-4 years ago. I was in the pits and getting hit and everything, and so it was always iterative. And so what I'm telling you now is where I've been the last year and a half, based on lots of bruises coming through the channel.
Yeda, please. It's muted. Sorry.
Sorry, if I may, if I didn't see other hand raised, I'd like to discuss the concept of relevance because it is very deep in your book. And you mentioned that story, this epiphany of your life when everything went very bad and then you change. So people may be relevant to the world, they be a scientist or a Nobel Prize, or they can be relevant to small town Georgia, they can be relevant to their family. How you can balance and become relevant, and how you explore this concept in people's lives, because it can be relevant in many ways.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And when I use the word relevant in my work, I tie it back to somewhat meaning, meaning, purpose, meaning of life, and that's meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and relationships can be in work and outside of work. And so how are human beings going to stay relevant if you how are we going to add value in the technological age? How are people going to live if the best research says in the United States, the best research says by 2030, 47% of the jobs will be automated. Okay, that's over 100 million people. All right, so how are they going to live? How are they going to have meaning? How are they going to feel good about themselves? That's what all relevance is. And what's fascinating is the United States number is lower than most other parts of the world. Okay, the automation number in China is over 70%. All right, so when I say relevant, I'm talking about I'm using it is to meaningful life, meaningful relationships. How that we, what are people going to do every day? How are people going to have food? How are people going to learn? Okay, etc. And I mean, is it, and you go back to the hunter-gatherer days, all right, and world evolution, what basically was the starting point of transforming the human race was when basically the Teutonic movement shook the world in Africa and everything, and our ancestors, okay, the chimps came out of the trees, and humans ultimately went into basically the savannas, and we had to go hunt, big lions, and that's when we started collaborating. Collaboration really goes back to the hunter-gatherer days, and so we're going to be entering our modern hunter-gatherer days. And so how do people stay relevant, and what's the role of business in that? What's the role of governments in that? And what's the culture going to be? And a culture of otherness, or a collective culture, and the good news is you can go back to 2,500 years to the great philosophies of the world, and all of them have a huge otherness component. the great philosophies of the world, whether they're Eastern or Western, their concepts are highly overlapping or consistent as to meaningful life and purpose. So as technology is going to call all of that into question, all of that is going to be called into question if we end up automating it at this pace and at the depth that's possible. You know, maybe some countries will basically say, you know, yes, we can automate it, but, you know, the government's going to say, we're not going to automate that whole area. All right. And if they can basically, you know, deliver products and services to their constituencies in a way that works, you can do that. But if it's a global competition and people can buy it cheaper coming from a country that's machine based, that's where I come from. That's where I'm coming from for what is relevancy mean. How do we, what role does business play and what role does society play in helping people have a meaningful, purposeful life? If you believe meaning and purpose is important to people, and if you don't believe meaning and purpose is important, okay, how are people going to eat?
Mm-hmm.
How are people going to eat? And so it gets down. I mean, that all sounds sort of pretty dystopian, but you know, and maybe things won't happen as fast as people are predicting. Generally speaking, they don't. But all that just means is that we're basically leaving the problem for the next generation. Yes. Instead of trying to solve the problem ourselves. Does that make any of that make sense?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And we have time for one more question. So Armando, please, and then we conclude. It's muted. Sorry.
Yes, usual. Thank you for your time with us and for your last considerations. And these and the comments from Ieda came exactly to a point that I've been thinking a lot. Could it be that we are about to have a change in our values because we tend to measure the meaning of the life of the people by how much productive they are, how much they work, and their success in the work, and so on. On the other hand, with all these machines and all this productivity without the involvement of humans, with the lowering cost of energy, that has been always a measure of how affluent a society is, we could be changing completely our scale of values to a point that food perhaps will not be the challenge anymore. Food will be abundant. Actually, food and the home and all these basic needs will be satisfied by itself. And, well, initiatives like the minimum rent for everybody and things like that are already being discussed openly. So could it be that actually in this future of the machines, we'll have the machines producing what we need to life, and our purpose and our meaning will be measured in a different way. So this is what I would like to hear your considerations. I recognize that the transition from one situation to the other can be chaotic and painful for large groups of people. No, the people that is losing their jobs today, they probably will face a very difficult situation. And you see reactions to that in the last elections, in the elections in many different countries, in the US including. But perhaps we are moving to a much better society in the future. So how do you, this is my view, optimistic view, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about this.
I think that's a possibility. I think that what you're saying is a possibility. It will be, and I think it's a possibility because more of the world is China is a dominant global player, and their dominance is only going to increase. All right. So let's just make a hypothesis. Let's just say over the next 20, 30 years, the two global players, big global players in the world, is going to be China and the United States. Doesn't matter who's first or who's second. It doesn't matter whether they're tied, but they're going to be the global players. All right. I think that the rest of the world, if you look at the rest of the world culturally, generally speaking, the rest of the world culturally is more open to what you're talking about than either the United States or China. All right. At least in my opinion. All right. I know the United States survival of the fittest culture and everything is, I mean, that's what's the stress of the confrontation, what's going on in the United States today socially, and what will continue to go on for, quite some time, is the battle has been joined as to what you're talking about, United States. That's what you're seeing. All right. And it is not clear at all that it's going to move to the new values. All right. Because of the way our political system is structured. China, it's not clear it's moving to the new values either, because of their policies and how they operate. So, but I think if you look in other parts of the world, all right, there's a natural inclination to where you're saying it's going. So I think that's part of what's going to be worked out over the next decades. And I think that the lessons from the great philosophies, what one big difference between the hyper-learning book and the humility book is that the hyper-learning book spends chapters talking about the great philosophies of the world and the consistencies between them. And it's the consistencies of the behaviors that the great philosophies were enabling are the same behaviors that are necessary today for human beings to be successful, whether it's a digital age or not, but most definitely in the digital age. So where I spend a lot of the new part in the hyper-learning book is the part of the book that gets into mastery of self, and how do people basically take on the duty to manage what's going on inside of themselves and to change their values vis-a-vis their fellow human beings. And so my writing in the new book is in effect trying to introduce a pathway to where you think it's going. I mean, that's really what I've done in the whole behavioral approach and the personal behavioral change process that I go through in chapters 1, 2, and 3 in the new book. And so, it makes me feel even more comfortable. I was comfortable. I published the book. Even more comfortable listening to your story, because I think that is likely. I think it's going to be very up and down depending on the part of the world. I think it's going to be heavily influenced by what the quote two powers do. All right, one power which is heavily deterministic oriented, and they will get to their goals. China will get to its goals because it's a different system. Okay, the big question mark for the world is what happens to the United States. What happens to the United States? Because we are there is not a consensus opinion that or the ability to transform politically at this stage to move towards a more humanistic environment. And that means that other parts of the world, South America, Europe, the Nordic countries, maybe India, maybe ultimately Africa, they've got to possibly bind together to basically create this, because the Nordic countries are already where you're talking about. All right, the Nordic countries role model this, and so it's easy to see. So then it comes down to the question: who's going to win the Battle of Africa, and possibly in India? And China is, one of their number 1 and 2 strategic missions in the world. Well, the 3 places that China basically is doing everything possible to be the lead influencer is India, Africa, and South America. If you look at where China's investing their money. And so the race is on for whose values are going to win. What you're talking about, the race is actually on today politically. Does that make sense? And I'm pulling for where you want to go.
Yes.
Thank you. This was very, very thoughtful. Thank you very much.
Ed, I would like once again to deeply thank you for your time, for your generosity. It was such a memorable occasion for all of us here. I can talk on behalf of the group. I believe all of us will clap our hands here for you. And it will be a privilege, hopefully, to meet you once again at some point in the future. So thank you so much once again, Ed.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And it was great being with you. Great questions, very thoughtful questions. I learned from being with you. All right. I mean, I would be honored, and I'd love to come back, because y'all are just a great group. I mean, it was just so thoughtful and everything, and time flew. And so thank you very much. I wish you the best on your journeys. Until next time.